You're 1 year old. You're sitting on a kitchen floor, and the world is enormous. Colors are louder than they should be. Every sound is brand new. Your mother's voice is the entire universe. And somewhere in that moment, something incredible is happening inside your skull. Billions of neurons are firing. Connections are forming. A brain is literally building itself in real time. You are having an experience. A real one. Vivid, immediate, overwhelming. And you will never remember a single second of it. Not the smell of that kitchen. Not your mother's face bending over you. Not the taste of whatever was in your hands. Gone. Not lost somewhere in storage waiting to be found. Just gone, as if it never happened at all. And here's the question that should genuinely unsettle you. Why? Why does a brain that is clearly capable of learning, reacting, bonding, and feeling apparently refuse to remember any of it? This isn't a small gap in your personal history. This is something every single human being on Earth shares, and almost nobody has a good explanation for. So let's actually go looking for one, because the real answer is stranger and more unsettling than most people expect. Scientists have a name for this phenomenon, and it's called infantile amnesia, sometimes childhood amnesia. It refers to the almost universal inability of adults to recall episodic memories from the first 2 to 4 years of life. Not just fuzzy memories, not vague impressions. A near total blackout. Ask any adult for their earliest memory, and the average answer clusters around 3.5 years old. Some people claim earlier, but when researchers actually dig into those claims, they usually fall apart. The memory turns out to be reconstructed from a photograph, a family story told at Thanksgiving, or a home video watched a dozen times. The brain is remarkably good at building a memory out of secondhand material and then presenting it to you with total confidence as something you personally experienced. Which means one of the strangest features of your own mind is that it can lie to you convincingly, and you'll never know the difference. For a long time, the explanation people reached for was Sigmund Freud's. Freud proposed that early childhood memories weren't lost, they were repressed, buried deep in the unconscious because they were tied to primitive urges and desires that the developing ego found threatening. In his view, your earliest years were locked away not because your brain couldn't record them, but because some part of you actively didn't want to remember them. For decades, this idea shaped how people talked about childhood, therapy, and the unconscious mind. There's just one problem. It's almost certainly wrong. Modern neuroscience has taken this question apart piece by piece, and what it found has nothing to do with repression and everything to do with construction, because it turns out your brain, in those earliest years, simply wasn't built yet to keep permanent memories in the first place. Here's where it gets interesting, because babies absolutely do form memories. This is the part that surprises almost everyone. If a baby's brain couldn't record anything at all, it would never learn a single thing. It wouldn't recognize its mother's face. It wouldn't learn to associate a bottle with feeding. It wouldn't flinch at a sound it had heard before. Developmental psychologist Carolyn Rovi Collier ran a now famous series of experiments in which infants as young as 2 or 3 months old were placed in a crib with a ribbon tied from their ankle to a mobile hanging above them. Kick your leg, the mobile moves. Babies learned the connection and began kicking deliberately to make the mobile spin. Weeks later, researchers brought the same babies back, hooked the ribbon up again, and the babies immediately started kicking before the mobile had even moved once. The memory was there. It had survived. So the babies clearly remembered something, and yet none of those same infants, now adults, could ever consciously recall that mobile, that ribbon, that crib. The memory existed. It just wasn't the kind of memory you can later describe in words, hold in your conscious mind, or retrieve on demand. And that distinction turns out to be the whole key to this mystery. There are, broadly, 2 different memory systems at play here, and understanding the difference changes everything. There's implicit memory, sometimes called procedural or non-declarative memory. This is the kind of memory involved in learning skills, forming associations, and picking up habits, and it develops very early. It's why a baby can learn to recognize a face or flinch from a hot stove without ever being able to describe why. Then there's explicit memory, sometimes called declarative or episodic memory. This is the kind of memory that lets you consciously recall a specific event, a moment in time, a scene with people and places and feelings attached to it. This is autobiographical memory, the I remember when kind. And this second system, the one responsible for the story of your life, develops dramatically later and much more slowly than the first. The reason comes down to real estate in your skull. specifically a small, seahorse-shaped structure called the hippocampus. The hippocampus is essentially the brain's memory index. It's the region responsible for encoding new experiences into long-term retrievable memories and linking them to context, time, and place. And here's the uncomfortable truth. The hippocampus in infants and toddlers is nowhere near finished developing. It continues maturing well into childhood, and in the earliest years of life, it's undergoing something called neurogenesis at an explosive rate, meaning brand new neurons are being generated and wired into existing circuits constantly. Some researchers believe this rapid neurogenesis is actually part of the problem, not the solution. New neurons integrating into the hippocampus may disrupt or overwrite the very memory circuits that had just been formed, essentially demolishing the filing cabinet before anything inside it can be properly stored. Studies in rodents have shown something remarkable. When researchers artificially slow down neurogenesis in young animals, those animals retain early memories for much longer than normal. And when researchers speed up neurogenesis in adult animals, they start forgetting things faster, almost like their brains were behaving like a much younger brain again. In other words, the very process that makes early childhood such an extraordinary period of learning and brain growth might be the exact same process that's quietly deleting the memories formed during it. But neurogenesis alone doesn't fully explain infantile amnesia, because there's another piece of this puzzle that's just as important, and it has nothing to do with biology and everything to do with language. To hold a coherent, retrievable, narrative memory, a memory with a beginning, a setting, characters, and a sequence of events, your brain needs some kind of structure to organize that information around. For adults, that structure is largely linguistic. We think in language. We narrate our own lives to ourselves constantly, even without realizing it. But infants and very young toddlers don't have that scaffolding yet. Before a child develops sufficient language, they don't have the internal tools to encode an experience as a structured, nameable story. They can feel it. They can react to it, but they can't yet file it away as this happened, then this happened, and it made me feel this way. Without language as an organizing framework, complex episodic memories simply have nowhere stable to live. And this is where the story takes a turn that almost nobody expects, because your earliest memory isn't just about brain maturity, it's shaped by the people around you, specifically by how much they talk to you about the past. Researchers studying elaborative reminiscing, essentially, how much parents discuss past events with their young children in rich, detailed conversation, have found something remarkable. Children whose parents regularly talked through shared experiences in detail, asking questions like, "What did we see at the zoo?" and "How did that make you feel?" developed the ability to form and retain autobiographical memories earlier than children whose parents didn't engage in this kind of conversation. This isn't a small effect. Cross-cultural studies comparing children in cultures with more independent, individually focused parenting styles against cultures with more relationally focused, group-oriented parenting styles have found measurable differences in the average age of a person's earliest memory, sometimes by more than a full year, which means the age at which your own personal history begins isn't purely a matter of biology. It's partly a product of conversation, culture, and how much the adults around you helped narrate your own experiences back to you while you were living them. There's also the matter of the self, and this is the part that tends to genuinely surprise people, because to remember an event as something that happened to me, you need to already have a stable, continuous sense of being a me in the first place. Developmental psychologists have found that a basic sense of self-recognition, the kind tested by the famous mirror test, where researchers place a mark on a toddler's face and see if the child recognizes the reflection as themselves and reaches for their own face rather than the mirror, doesn't fully emerge until somewhere around 18 months to 2 years of age. Before that point, a child's brain doesn't yet have a firm boundary between "this is happening" and "this is happening to me," a continuous person who will still be me tomorrow. And if there's no stable me to anchor an experience to, there's no coherent way to store that experience as a personal memory, rather than just a passing sensation. Autobiographical memory, quite literally, cannot exist before autobiography does, before there is a stable narrator capable of saying, "I." Here's where the story gets stranger still, and this is the detail that should really stick with you. Young children, somewhere between the ages of 4 and 7, can actually recall memories from their infancy and toddler years. In real time, in the moment, they can describe specific events from when they were 2 or 3 years old with startling detail. Researchers have documented this directly, interviewing 3-year-olds about events from a year earlier, and getting rich, accurate recollections. Then the same researchers came back years later and interviewed those same children again, now aged 8, 9, 10, and asked about those very same early memories. And the memories were gone. Not faded, not distorted, simply unavailable, as if they had never been recorded at all. Which means childhood amnesia isn't something that happens once, quietly, in infancy, and then stops. It happens in a slow, ongoing wave that sweeps forward through childhood, erasing memories that were, for a time, perfectly intact and accessible. Your 4-year-old self could remember being 2. Your 8-year-old self could not remember being 4 the same way anymore. Something is actively, continuously clearing the archive as your brain restructures itself, well past the point most people assume this process ends. So why would evolution build a brain that seems to sabotage its own memory in this way? One theory is that it isn't a flaw at all, it's a feature, the price paid for an extraordinary period of learning. In the first few years of life, your brain isn't primarily trying to build a personal history. It's trying to build itself, wiring an entire nervous system, learning language, learning movement, learning how faces work, how objects behave, how cause and effect functions in the physical world. That is an enormous computational project, and the theory goes that stable, permanent, richly detailed episodic memory may simply not be compatible with a brain that's rewiring itself at that pace and scale. You get one or the other, rapid foundational learning, or long-term narrative memory, and evolution appears to have prioritized the former, because a baby who learns to walk, talk, and recognize danger quickly has a much better shot at survival than a baby who remembers its own first birthday party in vivid detail. And this brings us back to something you may not have considered yet, which is that the years you can't remember are, by almost any measure, the most important years of your entire life. This is the period when your brain absorbs language at a speed you will never match again. This is when your nervous system calibrates how you attach to other people, how you regulate stress, how safe or unsafe the world feels to you at a level far beneath conscious thought. None of that requires you to remember it happening in order for it to shape you permanently. Implicit memory doesn't need a story attached to it to leave a mark. It operates silently in the background for the rest of your life. The way you flinch, the way you trust or don't trust, the comfort or discomfort you feel in certain situations, some of that can trace back to experiences from an age you will never consciously access again. You are, quite literally, being shaped every single day by a version of your life you have no narrative access to whatsoever. There's something almost eerie about sitting with that fact for a moment. Somewhere, there is a version of you crawling across a floor, hearing a voice, feeling a hand, forming the earliest wiring of who you would become. And that version of you no longer technically exists in your memory in any retrievable form. It's not locked away somewhere waiting for the right therapist or the right hypnotist to unlock it. That popular idea of buried early memories waiting to be recovered has largely been discredited by modern research, and in fact, attempts to recover lost. Early memories have been shown to often produce false memories instead, the brain confidently manufacturing detailed scenes that never actually happened and presenting them with the same emotional conviction as a real memory. Which means your own mind is capable of convincing you, completely and sincerely, that you remember something from your infancy that simply never occurred. If that doesn't unsettle you slightly, it probably should. So here's where we land, at the end of everything the research actually tells us. The years you can't remember are not evidence of a broken brain, or a repressed trauma, or some deliberate cover-up. They are evidence of a brain moving through the single most intense period of construction and calibration it will ever go through. A hippocampus still under scaffolding, a language system still being wired, a sense of self that hadn't finished forming yet, and a wave of new neurons quietly clearing space for everything still to come. Somewhere in that process, an entire chapter of your existence, real, felt, formative, gets written and then erased before you ever have the chance to read it back. And yet none of it was wasted. It built the person reading these words right now, the reflexes, the comfort levels, the very first shape of who you would become, all installed silently, permanently, invisibly. So the next time you look at a baby staring wide-eyed at the world, utterly unaware that none of this will ever be remembered, understand what you're actually looking at. You're not looking at a blank slate. You're looking at the most important construction site a human being will ever occupy, one that will shape everything that comes after, and one that will vanish completely from conscious memory the moment it's finished. You lived through that. Everyone did, and somewhere inside you right now, whether you can recall a single second of it or not, it's still there, quietly running the show.